It sounds like GE lost a 5.5 megawatt turbine over in Lithuania. Rosemary, pre-show here, we were talking about this, and I said, Rosemary, it's got to be a blade, right? You blade designers, you're just haphazardly designing blades. And you came back to me and said, no, Alan, you idiot. What'd you say?
I didn't say you're an idiot. I wouldn't say something so rude, even off camera. No, I totally would. But no, I felt a bit miffed because that's my background.
Welcome back to the UPTIME podcast. I'm your co-host, Alan Hall, here with Rosemary Barnes. We have a great episode today, a lot on the docket. Federal Reserve, United States is going to push up interest rates to slow down inflation. U.S. tech giants are buying more power purchase agreements. Amazon's leading the pack again. And in other news, Rosemary?
LM Windpower has made the longest thermoplastic wind turbine blade that's ever been made. And there's been a GE 5.5 megawatt turbine collapse in Lithuania.
Oh boy, more engineering news. Okay.
That's what we're here for, isn't it?
Yeah, I hope so. Yes, absolutely. So we have a lot to talk about today. Let's kick off the episodes by talking about U.S. interest rates. So anybody following the inflation in the United States realizes that inflation has been historically over the last 10 years about 1% to 2%. Now we're at 8% and still climbing. The rate of change, the acceleration of interest rates is astronomical, something that hasn't been seen in my lifetime, for sure. So it has a big impact on renewable energy. Some more recent articles, and I just saw an article yesterday from the Federal Reserve saying they may accelerate those interest rate increases. So what happens in the United States is the Federal Reserve act as the handler between banks. So there's an overnight interest rate charge as banks transfer checks and deposits across the country. So what they're doing, that the Fed is doing, is that they control those interest rates, how much they hold that money for, and they charge them a percentage. That has been essentially zero since the start of COVID, or really close to zero. Now we're seeing that the Federal Reserve is trying to try to restrict the money supply, slow down inflation, try to get it back under 5%, which is going to be a difficult task. And so what they do is they make gradual increases. So, Rosemary, from an engineering perspective, you don't want anything drastic to happen, right? That seems normal. So they usually make quarter percentage increases. Now they're talking about 0.5 percentage increase. So they were talking about 6 quarter% increases over the year. So it raised the interest rates to around 2.5%. Now they're talking make half point jumps. That's a significant deal in America. And having done some research on this, Rosemary, a lot of renewable projects are quote unquote leveraged. It's on borrowed money, which makes sense. Right. So, Rosemary, do you invest in the stock market? Are you in Bitcoin or Doge?
No, not in Bitcoin, but in stocks. Yeah, I definitely every time that I'm researching an interesting company, then I'll buy a small amount of money and buy a small amount of money worth of stocks. And yeah, sometimes they go great, and usually they go to nothing because I buy things where I like the technology, and most of the cool things fail, but yeah, every now and then I get a good one.
So, let's just say we'll create a Rosemary empire, right? Rosemary Empire has investments in a lot of different stocks and is returning an investment of, just say, 10%, 15% in the stock market. Say it's 15% in the stock market. When you go to your bank, your local bank, and you put money in the bank, the amount of interest they pay you for a checking account is essentially zero right now, right? So it's 1 or 2%. So if Rosemary has a bunch of cash, where are you going to put it? Are you going to put it in the bank, or are you going to put it in the stock market?
Yeah, exactly. There's been nothing else to do with money recently except for putting it in the stock market. Like you'd be lucky to get 2%. I would dream of 2% on a term deposit these days.
Right, and interest rates are low, exactly. So interest rates are low, so it's easier to borrow money and take the money you do have and put it into an investment than to use that money to pay for operations, for example. So what's happening now is that renewable projects, which may be greater than 52% leverage, saw some numbers that may indicate higher than that those interest rates are going to start rising. So the ability to make money in the market versus borrow money, that's going to gradually decrease. So the margins are going to become razor thin to the point where they're going to be getting much closer together, so it's not as advantageous to invest in the stock market. In the United States, I think that's going to have an impact on some of these renewable energy projects. And I don't know what it is in Australia, Rosemary. Are you guys going through the same sort of thing?
In a way, yes, but it's really different. I've just got an article from ABC News up because I read it recently about inflation and it just sounded so strange to me. So, I mean, our inflation is not as high as a lot of the rest of the world. It's only at about 3.5% now. And our interest rate's still effectively zero. It's, a tiny bit above zero. And every now and then they talk about maybe increasing rates. But this recent analysis that I was reading said even though, inflation is rising and it's above the target band, they're saying, well, it's not inflation driven by consumers feeling really keen to go spend their money. It's just inflation that's been pushed on people by, the price of oil going up, so petrol prices are higher, or, the same thing flowing through to all sorts of other things. I know it's really hard to get building materials at the moment. They're super expensive. And so this economist that's written this article reckons that means that they shouldn't raise the interest rates because it won't do anything about it, because it's not a demand pull inflation, it's a cost push inflation. Yeah, I don't know. It seems strange to me that Australia is so different to what's going on in the rest of the world. But I'm actually personally keen to see interest rates go up in Australia because me and my partner are trying to buy a house, and property prices are really inflated because interest rates are so low at the moment, so everyone can borrow a lot of money. And so we're kind of hoping that rates will go up and property prices will come down.
Oh boy, yeah. We don't want the housing collapse in Australia, that's for sure. But usually interest rates in the United States are typically in the 3 to 4% that what the Fed has been historically been, and I think we're going to need to get back to that number. But I do see a huge impact on renewable energy products, and whether they can borrow money cheaply is a big deal, because as we just saw with off the coast of New York, where they've had some leases sold, where they had $4 billion of leases. I'm sure some of the calculations about that $4 billion offered, it has something to do with interest rates. So the equations are changing too fast, and hopefully everybody is going to be okay, because we definitely need to get to some more renewable projects, particularly offshore in the United States. So we'll see what happens there. In power purchase agreement land, which it seems to be mostly a U.S. phenomenon, there's been roughly a 25% uptick in purchases from 2020 to 2021. Most of that has been spent or purchased by U.S. tech companies like Amazon and Microsoft, Google, and what Facebook calls himself now, which I guess is Meta. I don't understand that, but okay, right? We all understand it's still Facebook. So they've had a lot of contracts offered. It seems like the renewable energy effort in America and also across the world is starting to get into power purchase agreements. Rosemary, how impactful? I mean, if you were able to sell the power before you built the wind turbine farm, how big of a deal is that? Is that just pure security?
Yeah. But I mean, I don't think that there's very many renewable, like big wind or solar farm developments going ahead in the last, probably 10 years or more that haven't had a significant chunk of the production covered by PPAs. I think, it's been a really, really big part in the early growth of those kinds of projects, because it wasn't until pretty recently that they were really competitive on their own merits. It was driven a lot by people wanting to pay a bit more for the green energy, selling their customers green energy, or for companies like Amazon or Facebook or whoever, they like the image that goes along with saying, we're an energy intensive business, but we're doing it in a green way. That's really been a big part. It's a lot of security for the developers, and it's a really complicated area. I think it's changing all the time, and maybe the durations that people are signing up for now are shorter than they used to be. Like, they won't cover the full length. So, if Facebook wants to buy a gigawatt of power, they won't buy it for the full 20, 30 year lifetime of the wind farm. They might only buy it for 5 or 10 years because, price of renewables is dropping so rapidly that we saw a lot of people who got in early that, they commit to a price at the start of a project, and then by the end of the project, they're paying way more than the wholesale price for those kinds of energy. So, yeah, if I was a financial type, then I think that would be a really interesting area to get into, because it's always changing, and I think I understand what's going on with PPAs, and then it changes and I don't understand anymore.
Well, does this roll into a levelized cost of energy? It's like buying power futures, for example. That's a big thing in the aviation community for airlines, is that they want to have a stabilized price of fuel, right? So you want to know a year from now, I'm paying X for the fuel. Even if it goes up or down, at least I know what it is. In this more volatile environment for electricity prices and fuel prices across the world, does that then maybe give an Amazon an advantage that they know what the electricity price is next year?
Yeah, and I think more crucially is they know that they can get it. Because, if they've made commitments to a certain amount of green energy and then they just rely on buying it off the market, if a lot of other companies also make those commitments, then there might not be actually the projects available to supply all that. So then you're going to end up, having made a promise that you can't fulfill. And I think it's got a lot more to do with that in the case of green energy.
So looking at the numbers here, Amazon was the largest buyer last year at 6.2 gigawatts.
I could not believe that the numbers there.
It's a lot, right? It's a lot, yeah. Amazon has now a portfolio of almost 14 gigawatts. That's massive for one company to use that kind of energy. And Microsoft has about 9 gigawatts. Yeah, and Facebook's about 8. So the big tech players in the United States have, almost 25 megawatts, a little more, almost 30 gigawatts of energy that they're buying via PPAs. And I do see that trend to continue. And I think this is the weird thing about inflation right now. You may get people locking in more energy because the price of electricity is going to go up, obviously, has to, that they want to grab those PPAs now, like on the offshore wind projects off the United States. They may be doing that because it does tell you what your energy prices are going to be. So they may be doing it for a green, renewable reason, but they also may be a financial reason to do it, to at least lock in some electricity rates. And hey, Microsoft uses a lot of electricity. Amazon, with their big servers, uses a lot of electricity because everybody's photos and all your email runs through AWS probably. So that's an interesting development, and we'll probably see more of it this year. So, Rosemary, you want to talk about all the cool engineering news we have going on this week?
Yeah, so the most exciting one, and it's a topic that I've been watching since about 2010, about recyclable wind turbine blades, because everybody's seen those images of, blades going into landfill, and I don't know, it just feels like people are constantly talking about how wind turbine blades are unrecyclable, and that's this huge problem. And now we've seen finally a large wind turbine blade that's been manufactured. There's a physical blade made from thermoplastic resin that will be able to be recycled. So it was made in the Ponferrada factory in Spain by my old colleagues at LM Windpower.
Hey, shout out.
Yeah, shout out. I know some of the people involved in that project, and they've been really passionate about this for years now. So it's cool to see that come to fruition. And then the next step is that they're going to test it. They've got to do, all the normal wind turbine blade testing, and then after that, then they've got to recycle it. And I think already they took the scrap from manufacturing, and they're recycling that as well. So. Oh
yeah, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, so I've been following this since I've always been interested in composites. So when I went back to uni to do my PhD and started going to composite materials conferences, more than 10 years ago, that's always been a major topic. At that time, no one was thinking about it specifically for wind turbine blades, but for composites in general. I mean, wind turbine blades only make up 5% of the world's composite products. So, there's a lot of aeroplanes and cars and boats, construction that also is made of composite materials that haven't been able to be recycled until now. And yeah, I know, I remember I cited in my thesis 2 or 3 different papers that had designed full-size thermoplastic wind turbine blades, and the earliest one was like 2007. So, I mean, it's taken that long to go from we knew that you could feasibly do it, even with the materials back then, But now it takes a company, to decide to spend money on this. And it is a bit of a departure from normal kind of technology development in the wind turbine OEMs, because obviously the development time frame for this is much longer than normally what happens with a new technology is you get a customer that comes to you and says, we've got this project, but we need a technology on it that doesn't currently exist. So, develop that for us, and that we want to buy these blades in 6 months. Yeah, and the OEMs are usually really reluctant to just go off on a tangent and decide that something should be done and is a good idea and, put the money up for the development without knowing that they're going to be able to sell it later. So it's really interesting to see that they've prioritized this. And I think it's really smart, because I'm sure that as soon as one manufacturer has come up with like a proper, like a feasible design, feasible materials, once the lifetime is the same, the strength's the same, and the cost is, like somewhere in the ballpark. As soon as one manufacturer has a recyclable blade like that, I think that countries are going to start to regulate and say that you have to have this. So I think it is smart to be a first mover, and I know that that's why most of the manufacturers started working on recyclable blades a long time before. Currently there are no regulations about that, but everyone was working on it before, because they knew that there would come a day when they were told, well, you have to be able to recycle it, or you can't sell it in our country. And you don't want to be the only ones that can't sell. If if the EU says that, and you're like, oh, okay, well, we'll go bankrupt because it'll take us 5 years to make a blade like that. So yeah, it is an example of forward thinking.
Rosemary, the technology they're using is Arkema's helium liquid thermoplastic resin. It's a two-piece resin system, so they can injection infuse or resin infuse a blade system. That material was the same one that GE and NREL in the States here were developing, had made some smaller pieces of blades. So this is a natural extension. It's a 62-meter blade that was made at the LM plant in Spain, which is pretty big, right? That's a massive size blade for a new technology. Tell us, so the next step is they're going to send it up to Denmark, right? They're going to send it to Denmark to their test and validation center, and they're going to do a bunch of structural tests. How many months does that turn into to really do a structural evaluation? And I assume they just made one blade here. Would you, with new technology, try to make 2, 3, 4 blades to make sure that the technology is consistent in the manufacturing process?
Eventually, yes. They're not. This isn't a blade that they've got earmarked for a turbine, as far as I know. So that I don't think they're on the same kind of time frame that you normally are. Normally, you don't. Yeah, your test blade, it's the first blade that you make, but you make the second, third, fourth, fifth one immediately afterwards. But obviously, then if there's a problem with your test blade, you don't get the chance to go back and do anything about it. So this is big. It's a big deal to replace your whole resin system, and they would have had to replace replacing the glass isn't such a big deal, but it would have still, it would be a different supplier, a different finish on the glass. So there's a chance that that it's not going to perform exactly as they expect. If you think about the normal materials that they're using, that they're used to using, and be doing exactly the same, basically for decades for most manufacturers. Very reluctant to ever change any of their materials because they have this huge history with it. They know exactly how it behaves. They've got a lot of, not just of like lab tests with it, which they would have done the lab tests already, and component tests probably for this new material as well. But with the old materials, the old resins, they've got operational experience as well. They've got blades that have lasted their full lifetime, and they know how they fail or don't fail, and so the risk is very low. But with this new material, they've done some analysis, so they've done the lab stuff, and they've got some certain idea of what its properties are like. And I know that the resin manufacturer states that it's got very similar properties to a traditional thermoset resin. So that's excellent. That means the blade won't need to be a lot heavier than if you use like a normal thermoplastic. It's usually not as stiff as a thermoset. Yeah, but still, when they test it out, when they do the fatigue test, it's not going to be exactly the way that they expected, and they've probably got some high margins on there as well, some safety margins to account for that, and those will come down as they get more experience. So I think it makes sense in this case to make one blade, see how it goes, and then once you've done that and you've got a customer that wants to buy whole turbines with these blades on it, then you would then you'd start pushing the production up.
You think we're going to see a tested blade complete the fatigue cycles this fall? Is it like a 3-month, a 6-month test at the development center, at the test center?
Yeah, it's months long. They it's really cool actually. It's worth looking up on YouTube. They put the blade in a they attach the root end to something that looks like a hub. And then they sit these things on, and they call them exciters. But it's basically a thing that gets it resonating, gets it moving. Like if you're, sitting on a seesaw and you're trying to bounce up and down and get that, excite the natural frequency, and then they just let it wobble for months. So you've got to get as many bends as it would see in a lifetime, and you've got to do it quickly. So they up the load a bit and they up the frequency as much as they can, it takes months.
So if I was searching on YouTube and I happened to stumble across the Engineering with Rosie YouTube channel, would there be an example of this blade testing going on?
No, I would love for.
Oh my gosh! Well, all right.
No, I would love here. I can pitch to a manufacturer, any manufacturer. You let me into your factory or your test center, and I will make a video for you for free on my channel showing how the blade manufacturing and blade testing happens. Because no manufacturers that I know will let anyone anywhere near them, especially not with a camera. So. That's not been a video that I have been able to do, unfortunately. But please get in touch, anyone who wants to let me into their factory or test facility.
So what are the implications here? Now, they should let you in there because it would be a really great PR marketing move. Now, the one of the key things I think is going to be probably the harder or the more difficult part is because they're moving to a thermoplastic, something you could heat up and fusion bond, and it's a different type of material. Remember that we have tens of thousands of technicians that are very familiar and have gone through the GWO certification for repairing blades with thermosets. Do we start the clock over again? Do we have to bring everybody back through to get them trained on this Arkema material because it is a thermal or because it's a thermoplastic, or is there a way to thermoset to thermoplastic so you can use existing resin systems for repairs to bond to this material? I think there's a lot of open questions on the repairability side and probably maybe even the rain erosion side.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are many open questions. I mean, we've only just got one blade made now. And no thermoplastic blade has ever been on a turbine. So for sure, they don't know much about rain erosion. I mean, you can put it in a rain erosion tester. They have labs that do that, but it's not the same as putting it on a real wind turbine and spinning it around in some rain and dust and bugs.
Yes.
The repair methods, I don't know. It's possible. Any of those things that you mentioned are possible, but I don't know for sure. And at the moment, I mean, not all wind turbine blades have the same resin. Some of them have epoxy resin, and some of them have vinyl ester, and some of them have polyester, and so it's not just a matter of like someone shouldn't just show up to a broken wind turbine and just whack whatever patch on there that they feel like without knowing what the blade material is made of. That would already not work today. that idea. But that said, anybody that's gone through the GWO accreditation, and you don't need that to, not every service team has technicians with that accreditation. But if you had that, then you would probably need to learn about the thermoplastic resins before doing those repairs.
I'm sure on the repair side, someone's going to get the great idea to heat bond the laminates together because it makes sense, right? It's probably faster if you can get enough heat into it. It's probably faster.
And it's one of the benefits that people state that when you see someone doing research on thermoplastic blades, usually they're talking about having modular things and swapping out components and easy repairs, and that's because you can just weld them together. But I think I read with this particular resin that it's not actually recycled by just heating it. It says that it uses an advanced method called chemical recycling. and that somehow chemically gets the polymers to disentangle from each other. So maybe this one you won't be welding to repair it. So I don't know so much about the specifics.
Some of the technology I have seen via YouTube is the use of a very mild, what they call a mild acid, something in the realm of lemon juice. That's how it's been described. It's not lemon juice, obviously, because you don't want to have a wind farm around a lemon field. That would be bad. But so it's a mild acid plus a little bit of heat. That's the combo. That's the magic key that unlocks allows the molecules to split apart in the thermoplastic, so that you can recover. I guess you can recover both sides of the resin system, and in theory, I guess reuse it. That's what they're talking about. So as it has an infinite life cycle, that can't be right. It's going to be a little dirty and it's going to have bugs in it and all the stuff.
Yeah, and they do say, you'll do this recycling process and then you'll have virgin resin again. But I find that pretty hard to believe. I mean, it's just not the way of the world that you recycle something and get a material that's just as good afterwards. So we'll see. And I think that they still have some hurdles to overcome with the glass part of it, because obviously, the glass fibers come in a fabric, and so you're not just going to, get rid of the resin and then the fabric's going to be just ready to use again. So I'll be highly surprised if we see, like one wind turbine, an old wind turbine blade recycled into one new wind turbine blade. It's not going to be like for like replacement, but it's a step in the right direction. It's better than all.
I smell the marketing on this. This new blade made with 100% recycled material. That has already happened. Somebody's already made the website for that at LM. I guarantee it. Because that is such a huge marketing point. Think about it. If you could offer a 100% recycled blade made from reused material, recycled material, that is the pinnacle of recycling, right? In a renewable sense.
Take a look at your recycled plastic shopping bags the next time you go buy groceries. They're only 80% recycled plastic, and I mean, they've got a lot of a less demanding, it's less demanding use of those recycled plastic than a wind turbine blade. So, I don't think you'd ever get to 100%, especially not for something so critical. I think, usually because you can already recycle wind turbine blades if you really want to, but they do it by shredding it and
burning it,
or hopefully not burning it, turning it into decking material, or like making park furniture or flooring, or something that it's structural but it's a lot lower value, or dashboards and trays for pickup trucks. We call them utes here.
Utes, okay.
Short for utility, and they were an Australian invention, so we would know what they're called.
Whoa. Slow your roll there. I'm not sure that is fact. I'll check the Wikipedia page on that one. I doubt it's going to be an Australia-based term, but okay.
Invented by a farmer who wanted one car that he could use in the farm during the week and still take his mum to church on Sunday, and not mess up her church dress.
Oh, isn't that nice? We'll give Australia that one.
No, it's fair enough, because Australia does often claim to have invented things that we didn't really invent, or we invented one small component of, but I believe that one's accurate. Yeah, anyway, back to the recycling. You usually see products going to lower and lower kind of value products as they have, as they get reincarnated into their new lives, and I expect the same will happen here.
Well, I hope so too, right? The goal of all this is to make a more recyclable, reusable economy, and hopefully cut some of the manufacturing costs out of making blades. That's another huge benefit here, is it may be less expensive to manufacture blades. That's going to help lower the cost of producing wind turbines, and then maybe some of the wind turbine companies start making some money. That's all in the positive direction. So speaking of money, and it sounds like GE lost a 5.5 megawatt turbine over in Lithuania. Rosemary, pre-show here, we were talking about this, and I said, "Oh, Rosemary, it's got to be a blade, right? You blade designers, you're just haphazardly designing blades." And you came back to me and said, "No, Alan, you idiot. What'd you say?"
I didn't say you're an idiot. I wouldn't say something so rude, even off camera. No, I totally would. But no, I felt a bit miffed because that's my background, wind turbine blade structural design, and I just think you always assume that it's a blade that's broken and caused these turbine failures. But usually, if I see a whole turbine that's failed, especially it's not like a new design, I assume that it's foundation or something that could have been done just wrong in the installation, because this was a Cyprus wind turbine. GE has sold so many of them around the world, and I haven't heard of others that have just completely collapsed. So I'm assuming it's not a design problem. Like, it could have been a manufacturing fault, and it's possible, if a blade had some fault that caused it to just fly off the tower or the hub, or maybe if it just snapped and hit the tower, then of course that could once it gets really unbalanced, then they will eventually shake themselves apart. But it's really it's kind of interesting to see what people assume is going wrong here. I think it's evidence of biases that we all have. Like, I always assume, it wouldn't have been one of the blades guys. No, they're so smart.
Has to be the guy that poured the concrete, right? It has to be. Well, there are other,
because that's something I've got nothing to do with.
You didn't tighten the bolts properly, and I have, that raises a really good point, because we have seen those wind turbines up in Canada have the concrete pad issue where it was under design. They had a turbine fall over. That has happened, and I've been watching more and more LinkedIn content. Why I'm doing that, I don't know. But so about people tightening bolts on the towers, like tying them down to the pad. And the way I've seen that done is sometimes a little scary, actually. And I always wonder, are they tight? Right now, Lithuania is not, that is a country that has a lot of brain power, right? I've seen that in the aviation community for years. So it's hard to believe they didn't tighten the bolts, but it's something that has to be really looked at. They need an RCA on it. Right? It sounded like they shut down all the other wind turbines in the park until they figured out what was happening. But how long would it take to get to a root cause on that, just in a generic sense? A day, a week, a month, a year?
Oh, it would come in stages. So I think within a day you'd probably have some, some theories. Within a week you would have ruled out a lot of those. You can look at the pieces of the blades on the ground, and you can see, did this break from, falling onto the ground and hitting the ground, or did it, snap in half and then. If you can see that the blade broke before anything else did, then, that would be your indication that that's the direction to follow up. But I think one of the reasons why I always look towards the foundations as the root cause that always jumps out as me as a plausible reason is just because there's natural variation. You don't know exactly what's going on underground, and you don't know exactly the conditions, the temperature, the moisture. All those sorts of things can cause problems. So it's less of a pure human error kind of thing. But certainly you see failures in all parts of a wind turbine every now and then, so any of them are possible. And unfortunately, the engineers that do the root cause analysis, they never share the results publicly, so all we get to do is speculate every time what happened here.
That you bring up a really good point there, is that we don't really hear what the end result is. Obviously, the OEMs know and the operators know what the root cause was, and the engineers involved in that. One of the things that we do in aviation, and part of our business is aviation, is that we see those root cause analysis happen, because usually it takes a year of time for the federal governments to put together the report. But we get a report typically within a month, a quickie report, like here's why the airplane crashed, or here's all the details behind it. And then the more detailed analysis, like really detailed analysis down to metallurgy, pilot interactions, history of the airplane, all comes in a massive report about a year later. And that is used to then push the industry into looking at their particular design and make sure that doesn't happen with their aircraft. And we don't have that system in wind turbines yet. I think as we go along here, particularly as we get offshore and the turbines start to get bigger than most buildings, that we're going to have some sort of agency that's going to want to do root cause analysis and, in a generic sense, put out what has happened. Maybe not what the fix is, because we don't know what the fixes are on airplanes in a very specific sense. We don't know, like, they don't go into details about the designs, but they go about what happened. I think that's an important factor. So if you're right about the foundation, obviously they poured other foundations that probably are just fine, right? So what about that particular foundation was off? Was it the mix of the concrete? Was it the time of day? Was it too hot, too cold? All those variables come into it, and I think it's better for us to get that out in the open so that we don't repeat these mistakes elsewhere. So there's my 2 cents on RCAs. And, this kind of ties into the situation in Ireland at the Derrybrien wind farm, which is a 70-turbine wind farm with Vestas V52s. They have about 60 megawatts of production there. That wind farm was developed in 2003. It became operational in 2006. But during that early construction phase, and that wind farm is kind of built in a peat bog, right? So if you've ever been around Ireland and peat bogs, it's not the most stable ground in the world, right? So when they were going to build this wind farm, they had basically a peat moss slide. So a part of a hill collapsed, and early on, they stopped work. It sounds like the European Union got involved from an agency standpoint to look at it and said, hey, this isn't cool. Now, they went ahead and still built the wind farm, and it's been operational since 2006. So now we're in 2022. That's a long time, 16 years of operation. But now the European Court of Justice is saying, you're done. The initial permit wasn't correct. They ruled that the original approval was invalid. They did that in 2019. And ever since then, they've been fining Ireland for having this wind turbine farm operational. So now the wind turbine farm was going to extend itself. It was going to try to go to 2040. The European Court of Justice has said, we're done. Tear it all down. Now, Rosemary, I know the world is changing very rapidly underneath our feet. Does this make sense that they had a construction problem in 2003, and we're 20 years later, that now the wind farm should come down? Is that a smart move from just an energy perspective?
Oh, from an energy perspective, no, obviously not. I don't think it's about that. I don't even think it's about the environmental impact of this one wind farm anymore, because the environmental damage was that, the permit was taken away because the environmental permits weren't correct, or, they turned out to not be adequate due to some damage that happened during the construction, and then some remediation work they had to do after that landslide. So obviously, you don't reduce the environmental impact by then going and pulling out the wind turbine that's been, fine for the last few years. I assume the point is punitive, or to set an example. It's because if you just let people, you didn't have the environmental approvals in place, but now it's there, so you can leave it there and continue to make money from it. I mean, that would just be a really big incentive for, cowboy developers to just go do whatever, easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. So I assume it's just sending a message to anybody that was thinking that would be a good strategy, that you'll lose a lot of money if you do that the environmental protections are serious and you have to follow them. And we'll go to great lengths to make sure that you don't profit from a project that didn't look after the environment properly. That's the only way it makes sense to me, if that's what they're getting at. Yeah,
doesn't it kind of get into timelines of what is swift justice? There's a certain time frame, like in the United States, on a lot of, if I commit a crime, they have 7 years to catch me. After 7 years, that crime doesn't count anymore. That's essentially how it goes, right? There's a time frame in which you must be prosecuted in. If you don't do it quickly, then you lose the right to prosecute. It feels like this European Court of Justice has no timeline. that this thing just keeps rolling around the courts and no one ever makes a real decision. And then it gets to this catastrophic catastrophic ending because you're taking 60 megawatts off the table in Ireland. At what point do we have to put some timeframes on these things? If the landslide was so critical back in 2003, why didn't they just halt the project then? Does this? I don't know how this makes sense, because in a green renewable energy future, these kind of situations in the courts are going to be intolerable, because you can imagine what happened offshore, right? Are we in the process of building up and tearing down because the courts changed their minds, essentially? There's no indication of fraud here, right? I don't think I have, at least everything I've read about this case is not like it was done with malice. It just seems like the paperwork wasn't as thorough as it could have been. Therefore, it doesn't count. Does that make any sense right now?
Yeah. No, I mean, I see your point, but I do think that, it's important for community acceptance that any kind of project, including a green energy project, needs to look after the environment. And I think usually in Europe, people are very focused on that, and I think that the whole wind industry would quickly lose its social license if it was seen to just not care what happened to the environment. I don't know that the court has changed its mind at all. I think that there's been a round of findings and appeals and appeals against appeals and that sort of thing. And yeah, it does sound slow, but I always expect the EU bureaucracy. It doesn't sound like something that would move quickly, does it? But I think the point is that they had all of the reports that they needed to get the initial environmental permit, but the fact that they had this big landslide that should have not ever happened if they had done those reports properly, it suggested that they weren't done correctly, and I think that's fair enough. It's pretty hard for it's hard to check up on some of those things, and I think that there should be some sort of penalty for people that that make big mistakes like that. We see a lot of it in Australia with mining companies like, oh, whoops, we just excavated this important, Indigenous Australian site that, was 50,000 years old, and, oh, well, it's gone now, so we'll just continue to mine. And, I think that's kind of a common big business strategy, that they just make, mistakes like that, they pay a fine, and then they move on, and they, to the general public, it just seems like, really cynical that they never intended to play by the rules. And I think that this is the way that, you've got to make sure that companies operate within a set of regulations that keeps them, behaving in a way that the community is happy with. So I think if you didn't do stuff like this, then you might end up with some pretty poor environmental outcomes in the long run. So whilst it seems really harsh for this one developer, I can kind of see the point of making sure that everyone follows the rules and the intent of the rules, not just like oh, we got a report, but we just paid, I don't know, some intern $50 to write it for us. Like, do it properly.
Blame it on the intern. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, I think this is a big problem, right? I think in the United States, we're going to go through this same sort of situation. This is not related specifically to Europe, right? This governmental justice system delay piece is problematic because you're always at risk, right? And in any large financial transaction, what you're trying to do is mitigate risk. The court system opens up a plethora of risks, and whether you can withstand it or not, you have to build it into your project, right? I guess right now you probably have a set of lawyers on your project that are just there on retainer just for when things come up, and whether you spend the budget or not, you don't know. But the key is that you have to be prepared for these things and try to get them resolved as quickly as possible, and not let them drawing out for 20 years. That's obviously abnormal. We haven't seen that in a lot of cases, but sometimes Europe has that persona of everything is slow, right?
Oh yeah, Europe's great for bureaucracy.
The bureaucracy is very thick there, right? And which is not helping renewables, right? So at some point there has to be some level of Ireland can manage Ireland's problems. France can manage France's problems. Do we need a European court to come in and tell France, Ireland, Germany what to do? I think there's a fine line there.
Now you sound like a Brexiteer. No, Brexiteer. I mean, that's what you don't like the EU. It sounds like.
I think the EU makes a lot of sense. In a lot of cases, it makes sense. But again, you got to put timeframes on it. And I'm not sure any individual country can come back to the European Court of Justice and say, this is ridiculous. Come on.
If you look at the individual European companies, they're no better on their own than they are as a whole. I saw a post on LinkedIn recently by a guy who was trying to develop a 3 wind turbine farm in Germany, and he had a full like dining table sized desk full of binders of paperwork, and that was all of the hard copy information that he needed to provide in Germany to get approval for 3 wind turbines. So they just like it there for some reason, and it's been raised repeatedly as a big roadblock to faster energy transition in Europe, is just the incredible amount of bureaucracy that goes along with new developments. And yeah, I don't know if they're I've been really mean to the Europeans here, but I don't know if they're culturally capable of the change that it would take to streamline that.
Well, yeah, we've seen it in Ireland for a long time on the corporate tax policy, where the corporate taxes are very low. That's why Apple and Microsoft and a number of U.S. firms had money sitting in Ireland forever because the taxes there were lower. And I think they recently forced Ireland to come up to what the average is. I'm not sure what that is right now, and I'm not sure why Ireland did that. But every country has its strengths. Every country has its weaknesses. It should play to its strengths. And sometimes the Europeans, what's happening in Belgium is not conducive to you playing to your strengths. That's a shame, because I do think countries have a long history. Some of them have a long history of having very specific strengths, and we ought to be able to utilize them. I think it makes a stronger Europe. That's my take on it. So whatever that's worth, me sitting in America. All right. So Rosemary, great episode. Everything is, swimmingly. Renewable energy is still growing. Things are still moving forward, regardless of all the bad news that we hear. So let's just keep things moving forward. We're going to have a great renewable future. So if you're listening to us, check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. You can see Rosie on Engineering with Rosie on her massive YouTube channel, or check us out on YouTube also. We have a growing contingent, which is super. We really appreciate all the subscribers there. So thank you for tuning in to the Uptime Wind Energy Podcast. We'll see you next week.